Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is floating solar PV in Asia. I have with me Jeremy and Tanvi, who would be the co-presenters along with me today. We'll wait for a couple of minutes to give some more registered participants to join in, and then we will start. Thank you. Okay. So thank you again for the participants who have just joined us for the webinar. We had a good number of registrations for this. We had more than 90 people register for the webinar, and I'm sure people will be joining in a while. For the webinar today, it's broadly divided into three broad sections. So I would be taking over the introduction part of it and setting the context. And then Tanvi would cover the market and regulatory aspects for the floating solar PV in Asia. And then we will cover the technical part, technical review portion by Jeremy. And we will conclude with a project pipeline and what's happening in the market right now. What are the upcoming projects that people can expect to be online, as well as some of the key takeaways from the webinar. Yeah. After that, we would have a short Q&A session as well. In case you have some questions that you can't ask in the chat box or during the session, or if you have some questions later, you can always shoot out an email on the email address provided in this last slide. Yeah. Let's begin. So yes, as I said, I set up the agenda earlier in the meeting. For the speakers today, just for everyone's benefit, I am Abhinav Mittal. I'm the managing director of Yog Infra. Yog Infra is a infrastructure-focused financial advisory firm with their offices in Singapore and India. Personally, I have been doing infra advisory focused on financial advisory services for more than 11 years across Asia, including renewable energy developments. Jeremy is the managing director of V3 Energy, which is a advisory firm based in Singapore. Personally, Jeremy has more than 20 years of experience working in energy and 13 years specifically in solar, and he is considered as one of the leading industry experts in floating solar projects across Asia. Tanvi is my colleague at Yog Infra. She is an associate director with a firm with more than 10 years of experience in strategy planning, investments, and bid advisory. She is a solar expert and she has worked in renewable energy developers across Asia before she came on board with us. A brief intro about what Yog Infra's V3 Energy is. So as I've already mentioned, Yog Infra is more focused on financial advisory services like PPPs, business plans, financial modeling, commercial contractual due diligence, and debt raise. V3 Energy is a technical advisory firm focused on technical due diligence, technology market entry strategy, technology benchmarking, operational asset performance, owners engineering and independent engineering services, as well as training and capacity building in those areas. Both the firms together, we have a very strong focus in Asia, more specifically Southeast Asia and South Asia. Let me set some context for the webinar today. So floating solar technology, this particular market, we see there's a lot of activity in the recent times. You can see some of the headlines on the screen. most notably India, China, and Singapore as well, and a few other Southeast Asian nations have taken a lead in developing these projects. And why floating solar is gaining traction? So the major benefit of floating solar technology is the utilization of unused space on large water bodies. So be it be dams, be it be industrial ponds, water treatment ponds. So we have these large water bodies across Asia, and floating solar technology provides a very efficient way to claim this unused space for development of renewable energy. So that's the number one advantage, as you can see. The second major reason for the growth is the improved solar panel performance. So again, this is very, very site specific, but yes, due to wind circulation on water bodies, there have been instances where this effect has led to improvement in the solar PV panel efficiency. And then lastly, the environmental benefits. So yes, installing these solar floating panels on the water surface, it helps prevent the direct sunlight on these water bodies, which helps prevent algae blooms, which may prevent water, right? So it actually helps reduce an indirect benefit is to reduce the water treatment costs. Again, this is very, very site specific. So given that context, we will now move on to more detailed part of it, market and regulatory review in Asia. Over to you, Tanvi.
Thanks, Abhinav, for setting the context. Now we look at how market and regulations in majorly in South Asian countries has evolved during the recent years. So globally, next slide, Abhinav. Hmm. Globally, right now, more than 60 countries are actively pursuing to install these FPV systems, and there are more than 350 installed FPV systems all over the world. Currently, the installed capacity is more than 1.6 gigawatt globally, and it is expected to grow at 20% per annual growth for next 5 years. Realistically, there is by 2025 there is a 4 gigawatt of installed capacity. What we are looking at aggressively, there have been studies which say that it could be 10 gigawatt by 2025. So Asia has been leading this FPV installations, and China accounts for 44% of as of now the installed capacity, followed by India, Japan, South Korea. COVID-19 has delayed some of the recent projects to come up, but as these curves are now being lifted, we expect the ramp up of capacity much more. So we will be covering Southeast Asian countries. What are the regulations for the South Asian countries for FPVs? Next. So FPV is a part of solar. So it can be any of the countries are looking it to install, looking after ground utility projects, rooftop. Now they have introduced floating solar in their energy mix. So India, which has been aggressive in their solar capacity and had 100 gigawatt of target and already installed 85 gigawatt of solar capacity, has also targeted to add 10 gigawatt of solar FPV in by 2020, though it seems little aggressive as of now, but it is not at all impossible to at least add in next 3 to 5 years. They even if we only say 30% of major water bodies are to be we say 30% of major water bodies we aim, it is 280 gigawatt of capacity what we are looking at of only FPV. So government is currently looking at as rolled out tenders or looking to develop 2 gigawatt of FPV pipeline in India. NHPC, NTPC and SECI has rolled out various tenders in India, and a project like 600 megawatt in Omkareshwar Dam is in the pipeline. Coming to Malaysia, Malaysia is also targeting 20% of their 20% renewable energy in their energy mix by 2025. They follow large tenders for their large solar tenders for their solar procurement. They have already done 13 megawatt and which has already been commissioned, and they are further looking for more FPV in their energy mix. Vietnam again is have a very aggressive solar target of 17 gigawatt by 2025 and 20 gigawatt in 2030. As of 2021, already 17 gigawatt of 16 gigawatt of solar generation has been installed. They have a very attractive feed-in tariff, which was announced in June 2020 for FPV specially of around 1.75 Vietnam dollar per unit, roughly converting around 0.08 US cents per unit. They're planning a 47.5 FPV project in Malaysia. Next. Singapore has wants to quadruple its solar capacity as of now to 2% by 2025 and 3% by 2030. For a land-starved country like Singapore, FPV comes as a boon. So they have already taken a lead, and 160 megawatt big project has already been commissioned recently, and there are many more projects which are to be coming up, uh, and which have already been in various level of development. Again, Thailand is one of the country which is very aggressive on FPV and has a plan of 2.7 gigawatt to be built in next 16 years. They want to convert the 8 dams with FPV. The country has a target of 35% of coming from non-fossil fuels by 2037. Apart from it, many other countries in Southeast Asia and Europe have come up with FPVs, especially Indonesia. We have seen um, three bids of major of 60 megawatt, 90 megawatt, and they have come up with various. They are actively looking for floating projects. Next. Now, what is the cost of these FPVs? The FPV cost, what we have seen, is very country and site specific. Though as there are more, as the capital, more EPC players are coming and the technology is evolving, cost is certainly going to come down. And what has also helped is from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt scale, the projects are moving to bigger scale, to 50 to 100 megawatt. Even there are 2 gigawatt scale project in South Korea and bigger projects, which has helped to take the advantage of economies of scale, both in material and the labor cost. So as we can see, like India is developing 600 megawatt Omkareshwar Dam, which we expect right now it is under progress, but we expect the cost can be somewhere around 0.57 USD per watt, and it is very site specific. Yeah. Next. Further, what we see in FPV is the cost has a very broad range. It is, again, as we said, it is site specific and this. So even in India, the cost high case has been $1.06 per watt to 0.52. What we have noticed in some countries, there are still no guidelines to implement standards and safety guidelines for implementation of FPV. As and when they come, we expect that if there are good quality standards established in countries, the cost may go up. We have seen there are different range, but in Europe, the range is quite small. Yeah. Next. Now, tariff, what we have seen in the tariff is also country and site specific. But so even like Rihan Dam, which was in UP, which was signed in August 2019, was one of the lowest cost as per till date, and Vietnam, which has feed-in tariff, though there may be some regulation change in recently, has a very attractive rate of 7.69 cent per unit. Indonesia has also seen very low tariffs in recent bids, but details are yet to come when they will be established. So as local manufacturing of these floats established and there are new technology anchoring systems evolve, cost may come down. But yeah, all these regulations like levying of import duties, as we have seen in modules in some of the countries, and increased logistics, because some of these reservoirs in the remote areas and dams will all impact, and that makes it very site specific. So now I'll give this podium to Jeremy, and he'll take you to what are the technical details which we need to see in these FPV systems.
Right. Thank you very much, Tanvi. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to go through, I think, two key main parts in the technical review in floating PV is really looking at some of the construction challenges as well as O&M, and I think going back a little bit more, we'll dwell a little bit more on the details of the impacts of these. So can you move to the next slide? So this is really just to give you an overview of a floating PV system, where the key components, not everybody is really familiar. The picture you see here is a 5 megawatt floating PV system just north of Singapore, in between Singapore and Malaysia, which has recently got commissioned. So quite an impressive project. As you can see in the pictures below that, the key components really consist of the solar PV module, the floats that support the PV module, and then the string inverters or central inverters, which are connected in DC cables to it. Then you have anchoring and mooring lines, which then allow the floating PV system to be positioned safely and securely in its place, and the evacuation of the power and the MV transformer to the substation or in the substation itself. So these, I would say, are the really the main key components that make up the total PV plant. Okay. Next. An overview of the technology that's available in the market globally. I broadly put them into these 4 categories. I say broadly because there's always new technology coming up. There are a lot of prototypes, a lot of new technology, which may not fit so nicely in any of these. But I think what you see here, these 4 different categories will cover 98% of the global market currently we have at the moment. So moving from left to right of the different categories, the membrane type, we have Ocean Sun, who provides this. I think this is a very unique and I think interesting technology, which is slowly taking traction in the global market. Recently, I think they got listed on the Norwegian Stock Exchange, and they're beginning to make progress. So I think that's one category in itself. The other category on next, which will be the modular and array type. These two, I would say, will take up a very large proportion of the global floating PV market, and this will be easily 90% or 95%. Majority of the float suppliers today still use HDPE plastic or PE in various forms, either in a modular type or in array type. And these two are still continuing to lead in the global PV float supply market. The fourth part, where we're looking at modular tracking solutions, where either single tilt or dual tilt mechanisms, as you can see in these 2 pictures, I think very interesting, where there's a lot of potential for fairly large energy yield gain depending on supplier. And it's interesting to see how they also grow and develop into the various markets, where I think there is an interesting niche market for them moving along. So Can we move to the next slide? So moving on to the next part, which is really PV, floating PV construction challenges. The list of pictures here, I think, will be going down from top to bottom, kind of the process of the floating PV installation itself, where you have firstly a space constraint. Floating PV isn't really like ground mount systems, despite the fact that most of the components will be relevant in some form or another. If you can take the floats to be replacing actually the mounting structures on the ground mount or roof mount, this is really what it's supposed to do. Intent is to provide stability, provide a platform to be able to hold it in place. And so, however, when you're building a system on water, you very soon realize that you can't just easily go onto the water to install it. The process of building it is quite different. So you need to think of how to build it on site, near shore, then launch them out into the water. So the first row of pictures, you see people in various parts of the world, in the projects in Asia as well as in Europe, putting the modules onto the floats with slightly different float systems. And then you see them also starting to combine them into an array and then launching them from the shore and into the water. Obviously, these will be slightly different for different float suppliers. And I think, as I mentioned in the second point, float system methodology installation will vary from supplier to supplier. They're not exactly all the same. Also, the integration of the PV islands, different suppliers will have slightly different methods in doing that. The devil's in the details, whether it's one array or multiple arrays. So that will really depend on each of the float supplier themselves. The other part is also integrating the inverters, whether a string inverter or a central inverter. As you can see in the fourth row of slides, if you're a central inverter, it's either you float your system out on a floating barge, or you, in some cases, the inverter itself, the central inverter with the MV station, is put on piles. For example, the system in Singapore, the 60 megawatt in Tenger Reservoir, is actually mounted on piles onto the reservoir bed. So it depends on how the asset owner intends, or even how the reservoir owner is playing a part in implementing the type of solution in the end. So you have to have piling done in this case. Some don't have to. I've been to some in China, in Korea and Japan, where they are floating it out. I think the next part is cable management. Many different suppliers, depending on the size of your floating PV project, depending on your float system, might have a different cable management solution or cable routing solution to optimize the cable route, whether it's the DC or AC cable side. And it depends from supplier to supplier, and I can tell you every single project will have its own challenges in terms of especially the return cables from the substation. If it's a floating substation with your inverter and MV station back to the main substation on the ground, optimizing the cable length is not easy and critical as well. Last but not least, and I emphasize not least because anchoring and mooring, I think it is very critical in the long run, whether it's an inland water body PV system. It can be 2 to 3 meters deep, where you don't have really currents, or it can be up to 100 meters deep, where it's part of all these used coal mine. And how are you going to manage the anchoring and mooring? How are you going to do the site, the geotechnical studies to it, has its own set of challenges. And that's going to impact the cost as well. So it is definitely not every EPC's strength to be able to do all that. In fact, a lot of the EPCs globally are trying to understand and learn the differences and the peculiarities of floating PV, anchoring and mooring solutions in their design. And I will share some other case studies that has happened across globally. Next. So this slide is really to look at the floating PV O&M challenges. Not many people's favorite topic to talk about because everybody's excited about how to build it, the capex. Everybody is only keen on the installation and the construction. Many people, especially if you're not an asset owner, this is the least of your concern, and you won't really think too much about it. However, if you're an asset owner, this is probably one of the most important things to consider, because there's many ongoing challenges that you have to address and to manage. And I'm not saying that to be a scaremonger or fearmonger. I think it's really realistic, and I think the simple fact that you're not on land plays a very big challenge already, because you can't just walk to the water. I say that only because I've been onto so many floating PV systems, whether it's test pits or actual sites. When you are walking on floating pontoons, which are enough to walk on, but I think it's never the same as walking on land. And so making simple things like inspecting an inverter is an interesting exercise, to say the least. If you are walking on floating PV modules, pontoons to go up, the speed of which to take that will not be as fast as you're walking on ground. Or even in a big ground-mounted project site, or even a roof. So many people have very little understanding of that. So access to the PV system or the modules or inspections are challenging. You can see on the second row a bunch of guys on a small little boat trying to inspect some of the floats, and it takes time. Okay, so I think with all things considered, the O&M for floating PV is more time consuming, to say the least. And underestimating that is usually a big problem. So I think that's an important thing to look at. So it really slows down all the activities from inspecting your cables, your DC cables, your inverters, your combiner boxes, the normal things that you take for granted in a ground-mounted or even a rooftop project, where you have easy access to a lot of these equipment without having to go through safety procedures, wear safety equipment, use boats. I think where all these things which I think are not usually part of a normal operator's, asset manager's DNA or familiarity. So that's part of the challenges, but I think the impacts on floating PV in the impact side I can also share. It is also going into an environment where you're closer to the water, closer to nature in some aspects. As you can see, birds will come naturally depending, maybe it's seasonal, and that's the truth which I've seen in some of the projects. Migratory birds will come, will stay there, and will have bird droppings, as you can see on the third and fourth row. And I don't think we should see them as a bad thing. I think it's good that we can see nature integrating into technology, but I think it's appreciating how we can better manage that. So understanding how we can clean or prevent birds from resting is always a site-specific challenge, I would say. not just for floating PV, but even for other ground mount projects where there can be migratory birds and other animals. So this will impact soiling loss. There's also leakage current losses, unavailability losses that you have to attend to on your floating PV project. And going out, once again, as I said, to check on this, even if you have remote monitoring and understanding where the problems are. How to go and fix it will take a little bit more time compared to a ground mount system. So I think on the last two slides, you talk about biofouling on water and sea environments. These are projects, some of them are, you see actually in the marine side, are test bits that I've been to and been walking and monitoring. Truth of the matter is that there is going to be a lot of biofouling, especially in the sea. I cannot say how fast biofouling will be for all the different sites globally. And it's very site specific depending on the water quality, the type of nutrients, the currents that are flowing. And quite quickly, within 2 months, you might have, after cleaning, you might have to do maintenance again. And I say that only in context to some of the Southeast Asian projects and test bits I've been working on with project developers as well. So that is a real point to consider. However, I think with inland water bodies, there's less of that issue of biofouling. That's what I've seen, at least in the projects that I've been working on. It is definitely not as fast as the marine environment, which is a good thing, I think, on freshwater bodies because they're also easier to start off and easier to connect. And I think majority of projects have still been in freshwater bodies. However, I think the last row of slide pictures give you also another challenge. These are all in inland water bodies where there's a lot of plant and water growth. Once you see projects like this, you are concerned with actually near shading, where you have a lot of natural water plants growing quite quickly, depending on season as well, and the type of water quality, and also the distance to the shore. So it can quite quickly grow in the right season where it can overrun and overtake your entire floating PV system, as seen on one of the pictures below. So these are not to say that they are bad in itself. I think the key part is to be aware and understand how you want to maintain your project and optimize your yields and regulate your maintenance schedules with this knowledge. Okay, next. So I think we've seen a lot of interesting things in floating PV, and it's still a growing and I think a really fast growing part of the solar industry. I think where certain things that would still be necessary is looking at some of these. The first two parts I think are quite essential. Why? There really still is a lack of design codes globally, and I'm not saying that and blaming anybody, but I think it's just that the market in context is still small. It's just 1% generally, 1% of the global PV installation market size. So it's not huge, but it's growing. And I think there's a lot more floating PV installed that we are seeing already. The two case studies that I show there, they are iconic, and they are also good lessons for us to learn, only because we do not want to make and repeat these accidents, in our own projects that you will be embarking on. And I think it's always better to learn from other people's mistakes and having to make them yourself. I think that's always a wise thing to do. And fortunately, we have got these things to learn to prevent from future instances from happening. So the key points, I think, will be looking at better design codes. In the lack of that, I think what we can do is there's a lot of good engineering design principles that we already can work with. I think they are usually a little bit more advanced or conservative in approach in terms of the design, based on than using what is available in building codes in some of these markets. And I think there are already global standards that can help address to make your project more bankable in terms of having good tests done for your float systems. And I say this only because I think the floating PV market is probably 10 to 15 years behind solar on the PV side. PV modules, where PV modules have already very globally recognized and established standards on the IEC side. And that's only because you're looking at power output for modules. And that took a long time to get up to speed. I think now with floating PV floats, it is really looking at the key criteria is not power, but it's really tensile strength and reliability and durability of your material over the lifespan, of your design life of your products, where, it may be depending on float supply. If they want to claim it's 25 years, then there needs to be tested, show proof of that. Like PV modules, if you say I'm going to give you a power output warranty of 25 years, let's see that data and see that test done to be able to show that. So that's not really done currently. So these are some standards in that I put down. The only reason why I say I think these are good standards that I think really help make your project bankable. Obviously, the devil's in the details, where I say what's the right temperature, UV testing, the duration, the intensity, the type of UV, cycling as well. And the good thing is that I've seen some developers that I've worked with who have been very proactive, who have now used, have created their own set of standards in their projects because they really believe that this is important going forward for them. So it has been really, I think, good to see that they have done that to help prevent themselves from, increasing the bar, I think, of how their quality of the projects that they're doing as well. So very, very glad to see this evolving in the market. And I think the last point on new floating PV technology is really interesting, and I think has to evolve. And I say this in any industry, even in PV, it's just evolving so quickly. Modules are changing from multi to monoplug. Now we're moving on to N-type and HAT and maybe in perovskite. So I think we also see the float suppliers, I think naturally will evolve. Majority is still HDP floats. I think now that we are seeing more interest in the offshore marine side, where the oil and gas players are moving, we can see new designs, new materials used, new technologies, new concepts, and I think hybrids as well. So I think this will be very interesting period in the next couple of years to see a lot of these new technologies evolve and build the market itself slightly larger in terms of its application use. Yeah. Next. So I'll hand over the time to Abhinav on the project review side. Thank you, Abhinav.
Thanks, Jeremy, for the technical review portion. In this project review, we have actually discussed one case study for a recent project in Singapore in a little bit more detail, followed by the other project under construction or pipeline in Asia. So this is the case study that we are discussing is regarding a 60 megawatt FPV project on TENGER reservoir in Singapore. It is developed by Sembcorp Industries and supported by Singapore Housing and Development Board, HDB, and Singapore Economic Development Board, EDB. The figures that you see on the slide are collated based on public available information at the time of project development. So at the time of commissioning, the final commissioning, these figures might have changed a bit. So the size of the project is around 60 megawatt, occupying the space of 45 football fields, and you can see how it looks in reality. So how is it spread over a large area on the reservoir? This project was developed despite the recent COVID challenges in the last 2 years. So the PPA was signed in May 2020, and construction took from August 2020 to July 2021. The operation period for this project is expected to be 25 years for operation. Component size, there were more than 122,000 solar panels that were installed on the surface of the reservoir. And this particular system will generate more than 77 million of kilowatt hour or energy units each year, which is expected to carbon offset of around 60,000 tons of carbon emissions per annum. So to put things in perspective, this is approximately equivalent to taking off carbon emissions by 7,000 cars on road on a yearly basis, which is quite significant. Some of the other technical equipment that was used, details about that. So the solar farm is equipped with electrical panels, control system, and a 22 kilovolt transformer. Pontoons are made with certified food grade quality HDPE to minimize the impact on water quality. Waterproof cables have been used specifically for this application, and the modules are manufactured based on 210 millimeter diameter, big size silicon wafers. Again, this project has its significance given the size of the project for an island country like Singapore, plus the implementation being done during COVID in the last couple of years. Okay, in this slide, we have tried to summarize some of the recent projects which are either under construction or have been completed in the last couple of years across Southeast Asia and India. So this includes countries in Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Singapore, India. So these are the 5, I would say, major countries which have seen project implementation. And as you can see, the size of the project varies from as small as 1.2 megawatt to large projects up to 70 megawatt in India, which is expected to be completed in 2021. On the last column, you also see some of the names of the developers who have been involved in these projects, and I'm very happy to know that some of those developers are part of our webinar today. So thank you for joining. In the next slide, this is the pipeline of upcoming projects. So I would just like to highlight that one of the largest projects being built is in India, which is approximately 600 megawatt. So on Omkareshwar Dam, which is expected to begin operation by 2022-23. The project is still under tendering phase. It's still in a development phase. So a developer has not been finalized yet. But yes, this is one project that I would say the industry is going to watch out for, and what this project particularly did to overcome the EPC and O&M challenges that Jeremy talked about a while ago. In the pipeline, as you can see, a lot of these projects are in India, like in the state of Madhya Pradesh, Tumakuru, Bilaspur, West Bengal, Andaman Nicobar Islands. And that's because, as was mentioned earlier in the deck, India has a very aggressive target for overall solar as well as floating solar, specific target for floating solar as well. So yes, it's going to be a very exciting market going forward, and there are going to be developments in terms of how people overcome the technology and cost barriers to win these projects on a very competitive pricing compared to ground mounting and rooftop solar project that we see in the country. In this slide, there are some of the developers and financiers that we have listed down who are very, very active in Asia, more particularly Southeast Asia and South Asia, as well as some of the key financiers for such projects based on the recent projects that we have seen. These include, apart from multilaterals, we like ADB, World Bank, and IFC. We also have international banks like DBS, SMBC participating, as well as local banks like BDO, BNB, and BPI in countries. We're coming to the conclusion section. And I think if people have any questions, they can start typing in the chat box. We'll be having a session of around 10 minutes to answer any questions you might have. I think we have talked about a lot of aspects in the webinar, where we talked about the market, the regulatory part, the technical part, as well as the project specific upcoming projects. I would just like to say that FPV as a technology, yes, there are some projects that have been implemented and they have been implemented quite successfully. It's still an upcoming sector. So there are a lot of exciting developments being done. It's a niche sector. The biggest advantage for floating solar is that it is able to use or utilize the unused space on water bodies. So that's the key driver for this particular technology. And that's why these plants are coming up. So the countries, more specifically, which have large hydro dams, they are the ones who would take the lead in developing these projects on some of these dams, as well as large water bodies as well. So yes, we believe that this is the third pillar of solar. So you have ground mounted, yes, which has just boosted in the last 5-10 years. We have rooftop solar, which is very, very emerging for CNI customers more specifically. And then yes, this floating solar would help further to achieve these renewable energy targets that some of the countries have set for themselves. Among the global landscape, Asia Pacific region is a region to watch out for this technology. Currently also, the Asian countries dominate the overall landscape, as was mentioned earlier. And yes, this region has to take that lead in developing some of the new standards and technologies, as well as finding out solutions to some of these implementation challenges that are there for the EPC O&M perspective to these projects. We talked about formulation of FPV specific standards and project development guidelines, which would actually bring a lot of industry best practices and standardization in these projects. And some of the other technologies like solar, ground mounted, as well as rooftop, even wind technologies, they have actually set these standards initially. And it is a need of the hour that FPV also moves towards that challenge. And that's why when we speak with regulators, governments, we advise them to actually move towards this direction. So as I said, I think in the last couple of points, we have just re-emphasized that, yes, the focus needs to be on the viability of FPV as a technology right now, and not to worry a lot about costs and tariffs, because this would take time. So this is a market which is just growing. It will take some time to mature, and then it can be made comparable to some of these other technologies. But right now, the focus has to be on the viability part of it, and how this can grow up significantly. Right. Now, coming to some of the things that need to be taken into account. So when we do floating solar financial models for clients as financial advisors, what to look out for project economics. And some of these terms may be very, very familiar to you because these are for typical solar projects, and some of them are very, very specific to floating solar as well. Now, let's talk about very briefly in each of these major items. So for example, in CapEx, right? When you talk about project development costs, any floating solar PV would have around 7 key categories of costs. So these would be your modules, which would be dual glass modules typically, which are the most popular and either framed or frameless. Then you have inverters. For inverter costs, they may not be a very significant difference compared to the other ground mounted or rooftop solar projects. You have electrical balance of supply, number 3, which actually talks about cabling and transformer costs that you would have to incur. The SBOS, structural balance of supply, talking about the structure of the project itself, which includes anchoring and mooring. And SBOS is around 25 to 30% of your total project cost. So that's a major factor along with modules for these projects. Labor costs become a very important part for these projects, and that's primarily because there is specialized, for at least an experienced labor required for both implementation of these projects during construction as well as for O&M, because O&M for these projects has its own specific challenges, which Jeremy talked about, right? How to be actually able to reach the project on floating barges compared to when you talk about, on a ground mounted solar. So that's a significant challenge here. You have these other soft costs that are typically in the project, which include logistics, design, engineering, and lastly, the developer costs. So these developer costs can be as simple as project management cost. You have an owner's engineer who is actually monitoring the project, or they can be very, very specific to a contract as well. For example, a water rental cost. So if you're implementing a project on a water body in which the developer has to pay a rental, which is not unheard of in this industry, then that's a very, very specific developer cost that is applicable for a particular project. Some of the other things that you see in terms of cost are IDC, upfront fee for banks, and DESRA funding, which are very, very typical for project finance perspective. These are typical plant details that you would have to as an input assumption for your financial model. Capital structure, so the percentage of total project cost being financed by equity vis-a-vis debt, and your debt moratorium, tenure, your overall WACC or the discounting rate for your return calculation, and the interest being paid on DESRA. Revenue is, so we talked about, like, for example, in countries like Vietnam, until a while ago, it had a feed-in tariff. So that's very, very specific, a lot of certainty in terms of what the tariff is going to be. However, if you're signing a PPA, it really depends on the PPA terms, whether the tariff is escalated, whether you have a flat tariff for the next 25 years, flat tariff being the most common, and what's the bid that you want to bid, right? And is there an escalation allowed? The reason we have this wholesale price of electricity as one of the input assumptions is because many a times the developers are allowed to sell a part of the energy in the market, either as a captive use or even on the electricity exchange, and can earn some additional revenue out of it. There may also be some additional revenue during the early commissioning phase, wherein the project has been completed but not commissioned yet. So during those 6 months, 1 year, you can earn some extra revenue, which can give a boost to your returns from the project. Then we talk about operating costs. So yes, a lot of these operating costs, it can be a very, typically for these projects, we don't see a very simple single number. It is a multitude of factors, which would be based on the very, very site-specific things, as Jeremy talked about, how to prevent the fauna, how to prevent the bird droppings, how to employ the labor for actually maintaining these projects. Inverter replacement cost, SPV running costs, the typical project level cost of accounting, auditing, and other such services. And lastly, the taxation and macroeconomics, which again is very, very country specific. Besides the corporate tax rate, you may also need to consider the custom duty part of it on the materials that are being imported from the country, or is there any VAT or withholding tax applicable on it. So another thing that we want to talk about today is regarding the supply chain on the focus on global FPV suppliers and the work that we are currently doing together Yog Infra and V3 Energy are doing. So Jeremy, do you want to introduce that? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the things that we see could be helpful, I think, with the market is that not just knowing about the float supplies, but understanding them in a little bit more detail. And it's not about the market. I think market is slightly more commercial, but having a more detailed understanding of the float suppliers, their products, how they're positioned, what are the key technical specifications vis-a-vis each other. And I think the reason that we believe that this is becoming more useful is that in my experience over the last 3 years, many energy companies, global energy providers are looking to understand the differences between each of these float suppliers, because they would like to understand what's the difference between A, B, and C. And I think this gives them better insight to be able to appreciate the technology, appreciate the supplier, and how that they can be supported in their project in a particular part of the world. So a lot of them will start to use this as a way to shortlist, a bunch of float suppliers that they believe will be helpful based on their criteria in their project's specific area. And I think this is something that I think we will like to also be able to provide. I think the market to be able to look at these things. And so some of the things are understanding the technical specifications, the logistics, the challenges of installation, anchoring and mooring, specifically how are they integrating them, the O&M side. So it is getting the market to appreciate, at the end you're buying into not just a product but a solution, because they all integrate together to form your power plant that they all operates and perform well. It's basically really the foundation of your floating PV project. If you want to look at it from that perspective, if the floats don't float, then everything is going underwater in the long term. That's as simple as that. And I'm not saying that they are, but it's ultimately the truth. Even for ground mount systems, if you're going to be building in earthquake zone, and I've been involved with projects within this region, either as earthquake or flood prone or drainage issues where earth starts to disappear, it is the right foundation and the right design that is going to save your project, your power plant. And often that's not always looked at so well. People look at the modules, the technology, and the largest project risk in a project of a power plant is really the civil works, the geotechnical, and the drainage system. The electrical part is the easy part, the easiest part. So, and I do see this as the same approach in floating PV, where the biggest risk, not the biggest, one of the main risks is the issues with the floats and anchoring and mooring. And there are many experiences already with projects that have challenges and some very large issues. So I think this is part of the reason why we believe that sharing the knowledge and educating the market is really important so that they can make the right decisions. So this is something that we've worked on, and hopefully people in the market will find this useful in sharing this knowledge with them. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the end of our slides. And again, thank you everyone for attending the webinar. We have some questions on the chat box. So let me start. So yes, the slides would be shared at the end of the webinar. So we will be sending the recording as well as the slide deck for this webinar to all the registered participants. So the next question talks about the effect of FPV on fisheries. So Jeremy, do you have any insights on that?
So it's a good question. I think floating PV on fisheries and even for agriculture, I think it's becoming very popular. We have seen that in China, Taiwan, there's a lot. These are two big areas I think have been quite progressive in that. So it depends. China has a lot of pile systems, so I'm not sure if you call that floating, but that's been used over fish ponds, very large fish ponds, and then it's huge. 230 megawatts. There's one specific project in China. So that's large. But in Taiwan, there's a lot of fish ponds, smaller fish ponds that have been using them in maybe not as large, but I think starting to have traction. Yeah.
Right. I think the next question is regarding the energy yield and whether the energy yield. So this is by Ms. Ram Kumar. Whether energy yield gain in FSPV established due to ambient condition changes or still a stimulation. So
Yeah.
let me. Yep. go
Yeah,
ahead.
I will jump in. So this is my favorite topic of the month because there's too much fake news going out. And I literally say fake news because, people say, oh, you're going to get 10 or 50% energy yield gain. And I says, no, you're not. I said, maybe. It
Right.
really depends. And I think we all go back to the fundamentals. And I'm very glad because in my time, my hypothesis is that, this was information shared with me 3 years ago by a specific flow supplier. And he said, oh, we got the data in our, we did this in a test bed, And I said, well, it's interesting. I said, I didn't say no. And I said, okay, but I don't think in Singapore you're going to see that sort of energy yield gain. Fact of the matter is because why? The only way to improve your energy yield gain is that your temperature difference from the water, the temperature over the water and temperature over the land has to be a very big temperature gradient, which is not what we see. And the truth of the matter is we went to do our own test bed to verify that. And we verified that with other people's test beds, and that came out to be true. The energy yield gain is not 10 to 15%. And I think it is some gain, and the gain has only to do with one thing, one major part: airflow and the wind speed at the right time where the module is hottest, which is in the middle of the day. So if you don't have that, then your energy yield gain will definitely not be as high. I cannot say specifically how much higher that will be, but that is something that I'm very certain that does not reach into the 10 to 15% yields. And I think maybe that was initial data. And I think maybe that's really site-specific data. And I said the only way that can happen is that your water body is in a very large water body where the temperature or surface of the temperature is very, very low, and compared to land where the land heats up very fast during the day. But I think that's not the way you want to quantify and compare temperature gradients or the performance of your project. So I did see somebody speaking who was asking a question about UV and UC, and I think that kind of addresses the question. Your UV and UC, your temperature coefficient for your PV plant is very site specific. What we've understood and what we model is that different flow suppliers with different solutions will have slightly different yield gains. It is not going to be the same. And I think if you speak to any of the other research institutes who have done their own test beds and studies, you will see some interesting results. And also some very interesting results differing from European projects versus Southeast Asian, North Asian, and the type of environment as well. So I think we all have to be technically aware that it is site specific with the irradiation you have, with the wind speed, the wind temperature. So I hope that gives some light to the market. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea is that in case someone is making a claim of 10 to 15% gain, then you need to kind of actually see, okay, I need to do some more diligence about what's happening in this.
Yeah, I think that's important, and everybody should do their due diligence to check, and because that's going to be a huge impact on your financial model, and you may never make your returns.
Yeah, it's just a modeling, maybe on a paper, maybe then, not actual returns. Okay, I think we have one last question, so and we can take that because then we can close. The question is regarding can you, for the project planning purposes, can you advise how long to cater for permitting, EIA, etc.? Okay, so I think this question, and Jeremy, I think you can add on. Just based on our experience, I think this is very, very specific to the site and the country that we're working on. So I think the case study that we highlighted earlier for Singapore, that's primarily because we wanted to highlight at how fast, even though there was COVID challenges, the project was still implemented in the time span of 2 years post PPA. And this is very specific to how the government's taking up these projects. So how well the project is being prepared before it is being published or before it is asking for tenders from the private sector developers. Tanvi, do you want to add maybe something based on your experience for solar projects? Yeah.
Yeah, so as per it, the certain, as you in the question, it has been asked if there would be any additional agencies from the land based PV system. Yeah, there could be, uh, which would be environmental impact assessment for solar in. I'm talking more about India. Obviously, these are all country specific. In India, though government tenders, we still need many of these permitting and this. So yeah, environment impact for water bodies would be one of the things which would need to be cleared. But that is again, as Abhinav mentioned, that it is a work which should be done pre-tendering stage rather than after tendering. This is the work which government should take before the tendering. So right now, most of the projects are tender based, in which all these EIA has been done and then the tender has been done. After that,
Yeah.
it is more electrical equipment and electrical commissioning, which is about the how the project has been implemented, which would be similar to solar. Obviously, some part has to be checked because it is underwater and those electrical, but that would be similar. And these projects won't require much different permits than a typical land mount. Yeah.
So I think this is a very interesting question because I was working on a 50 megawatt project in Germany earlier this year, and the biggest question was permitting. And this was one of the questions that the developer was asking. I've been speaking to the governments, the local government agency, the water agency, the environmental side, and none of them know what to do because they've never done this before.
Yeah.
And I said that it is not different in a normal environmental impact assessment. You just need to do your social environmental impact, which according to World Bank or IFC standards in its approach, if you want to get a bankable project done. And it's something that is, I wouldn't say rocket science, but it is something that just has to be done in approach where it's on the water, it's not just on land. So I think having gone through that process with Singapore and a few other markets, there's always slight nuances to the different agencies that are vested in them. Let's say for Singapore, it's PUB, but let's say you're doing a project in the Philippines or Indonesia, it's the owner of the water body itself. Whether they have their own requirements and their permitting requirements. Indonesia is slightly different. So it's not totally different. I think by and large, I would say 80-90% are the same. So it's just needing to understand the local slight requirements and from the water body owner. And monitoring itself, I think if you ask me, if it's not for water consumption to drink, then it's probably less challenging. And I say that because I think the requirements for safe water, safe drinking is definitely higher. And depending on the type of client, they might impose more restrictions and longer durations on the study. So I hope that gives some people a flavor of understanding. It's minimally, I would say it takes 6 to 9 months, minimally. Right. Okay, I think if you take anything shorter than that, then yeah, I would say that's not so. Yeah, I haven't seen anything shorter than that. So it should cover a certain duration, and sometimes it's up to a year or more. Time permitting, of course.
Yeah, and I think the access to site becomes more difficult if you're not able to travel. So
yeah.
then it
Yeah.
makes more sense to take some buffer for that as well. Yeah.
And one more thing on EIA, specifically on environmental impact assessment, I want to add that one of the major area which we government want to acquire is reservoirs, which have already done EIA when they were being utilized for hydroelectricity dams. So now there would be add-on, but yeah, these are unused water bodies which we are talking about. So yeah, obviously there has to be done, but yeah, these are unused water bodies, and which there would be EIA done for dams. If it is we are talking, there would be an EIA done when the dam would have been made. But yeah, that is a different game altogether. Yeah.
I think
Hmm.
I think depending on the time that it's been done has also
Yeah.
an impact.
Yeah,
I can
that,
tell you the EIA for nearshore environments where I was looking at a project in in Maldives and in Seychelles is different, completely different because of the skill sets of the type of people, the hydrology, hydrodynamic tests going to be done. It is complicated, even more complicated to be honest, especially if it's a marine area. So I think EIA can be reasonably straightforward or can be very complex. So I'm not saying you can't put a fixed time on that, and hope you have a broader understanding of the duration of an EIA or even the scope of the EIA to be done. There's always a fairly specific. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
thanks
Thank you, everyone, for
everyone.
joining us. In case you still have any questions or you want to speak to us, you can reach out to us at info@yoginfra.com, and we would be very happy to help you on this. And any other questions, we would be coming out with a series of some more publications on floating solar in the coming months. So please do keep a lookout on our LinkedIn page. And thank you again for attending today. Thank you,
Okay.
Jeremy.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Abhinav. Thanks, Tanif.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, sir.